Good morning everyone, welcome to Living It Up, to another rainy day here in Pune. But I don't mind it because I'm on this new motorcycle, the Bajaj Pulsar 160 4V SS. This is the top spec variant of the new Pulsar 160. And yeah, from the outside, from far, you would think, oh, it's the same bike other than the graphics, but a lot has changed. A more oversquare engine, bigger bore, smaller stroke, which is again 164.9 cc, but now this pumps out the highest in class, 18.5 PS and 14.4 Newton meter of torque. The other big news, of course, is the fact that this gets ride-by-wire throttle. So along with this, Bajaj have been able to incorporate other things like 4 or rather 5 different riding modes. 4 because the 4 riding modes also change the way the throttle responds, the way the traction control kicks in. Yes, this one also gets traction control now, and how the ABS intervenes. The 5th one, which is a Tour, that is exactly like the road mode is what we are told. It's just that the display changes and gives you more pertinent information like what is your average fuel economy, how much distance you'll travel before it gets empty, so on and so forth. And as you can see, you can access and view which mode you're riding in on this new 5-inch TFT display, which of course for a motorcycle in this class is always a welcome addition, but we'll go a little bit more on the TFT dash later. The other big thing is, of course, over the years this motorcycle has been upgraded. Now this one comes with chunkier 37mm upside down forks. This has the biggest in class disc setup. You have a 300mm disc at the front, you have a 230mm disc at the back. And on the tech front, the other big news is that on this SS variant you also get Google Maps by mirroring, which is something which I've never heard of for a motorcycle in this class. But for whatever reason, we have not been able to connect any of our phones to this instrument panel to access the navigation, so we haven't been able to test it. I've tried on my Apple phone as well as my friend's Android, but it is there. I guess there's just a bug with this particular bike. And the good news about the mirroring is the fact that if you are an Android user, you can actually switch off the screen on your phone. You don't have to keep it on. But Apple users, yeah, you will have to keep it on, just like on the system that we experienced on the Himalayan 450. Of course, some of the other things have continued, like you have backlit switches, you have the same 14-liter tank, and more importantly, the curb weight on this, despite the changes that they've made, has continued to be 151 kgs wet. The other changes include the changes to the rider's triangle. They wanted to position this motorcycle as a motorcycle that you can live with every day, but which also offers you performance that has so far been associated with the NS series. So of course the performance is there with the hike in power, but on the ergonomical front, they have taken a more comfortable stance in the sense of now the rider's triangle has changed a little bit. The foot pegs stay in the same position, but the handlebar now is a little bit higher and a little bit closer to you to make your time in the saddle that much comfier. And the seat height continues to stay at pretty accessible 795 millimeters, but they have changed the shape of the seat a little bit to allow you to be comfortable on the bike for longer duration, is what they tell us. That is something which you'll obviously not be able to test on this first ride because we get very limited time with the bike. But the first impressions are pretty positive. The first thing, of course, I would like to talk about is the most important aspect, which is the engine. Yeah, it is definitely a lot more potent at the top. It has a much stronger top end. Let's wait for a straighter section. Here we go. Yeah, it's much stronger up top. We also told that 85% of the torque this makes 14.4 Newton meters, is available from just 3,500 RPM. But I feel that is where this has lost out compared to the previous N160. I think that had a much stronger mid-range. This one, let's get on the gas. It's only now. So it really picks up speed from 5,000 RPM. Below that, there's not much happening. So I think this is where the N160 was a little bit better. Of course, because you had a longer stroke with the 2-valve engine. But up top, this has definitely made a huge stride. And now this has a claimed top speed of 114 kilometers an hour is what we are told. Unfortunately, we are not in the right conditions to really push the bike and put that to test. But going by how strong the top end is, good chance you will hit that mark. The other thing that you will notice straight away is the exhaust note. We already like the exhaust note on the 2-valve iteration. This one, I would say, is a little more pronounced. Feels a little more raspier. Sounds pretty good for a 160cc bike. But the sound also gives you an indication of the change which has happened, and that's down to the vibrations. So on the 2-valve setup, the one thing which I enjoyed and was surprised by the most was undoubtedly just how smooth that engine felt. It did not matter where you were, the engine felt really smooth, perhaps the most refined Pulsar that I had ridden thus far. But that's one aspect where I guess Bajaj had to sacrifice a little bit in the pursuit of extracting more performance. Yeah, so far good here. Opening the gas. Here, around 7,000 RPM is where you start feeling the stinge on the foot pegs as well as the handlebar. As I open the gas, they do settle down a little bit, and most definitely in the 5th gear, they almost disappear. So they are not super pronounced. They don't really hinder your experience. Some might argue that they actually give you a better sense of speed, but compared to the 2V, yeah, it's definitely not as smooth. And in the 4th and 5th gear, they do settle down. They never really get in your way. But if you were expecting the same level of refinement from this engine, well, that hasn't happened. But I don't think it's a deal breaker at all. And if you're going to say that, hey, anyways, in the 5th gear, you're saying that you don't barely have any vibes. The problem with the 5th gear is it is overdrive, which means it's not the most usable for those quick overtakes. You will have to downshift. But on the highway, yeah, I don't think you will have a problem with the vibrations. So that's the small price that you will pay for the extra performance that you have up top. Watch it go. Now let's test the most important thing. Nice. The brakes are nice. The brakes are really nice. It's been a while, but I remember being quite happy and impressed with the braking performance on the older bike. And on this one, it continues to impress. In fact, this SS variant also gets a 130 section radial tire at the back to give you a little more stability. What has impressed me the most is undoubtedly the ride quality on this. It is 100% on the softer side. They have focused more on making this motorcycle an everyday bike, and I don't mind at all, because the ride quality on all the sorts of roads that we have been riding in has been really good, really nice, really supple. It's only the harshest of bumps which have basically come across, but otherwise suspension is definitely one of the highlights of this motorcycle. It has been very nicely tuned in terms of the handling as well. Unfortunately, we are not in the best of conditions to test the handling. I would wait till I actually ride this in dryish conditions where we can actually push the bike. But as was the case with the previous bike, the feedback from the chassis is really good. In fact, we were told that this at 2 of the 3 axes is a little more rigid, so the ingredients are there for this to be a pretty decent handler. And even in terms of the agility, yeah, it feels very light, very easy, very quick on its feet. Now let's try changing the modes. You're supposed to hold on to the top button till this starts glowing. Let's go to, so if you go in the touring mode, that's what happens. You see the DTE, you see the trip distance. So yeah, just a layout change, but the mapping is the same as the map that we're going to choose right now, which is road. Sorry, now we're trying sport. Let's see what the sport map does. Here we go. Okay, feels definitely sharper, the throttle, a lot more responsive. How is the fueling though? Yeah, this feels a little more jerky compared to the road map, which is expected because they wanted the throttle to be as responsive as it can be while still being manageable. So you do have to pay a little more attention to when you are dialing in the throttle. And I'm also, in these dreadful conditions, happy that this was one of the first motorcycles to get, especially in this class, to get dual channel ABS. And especially when you're riding in these conditions, this is great. And I'm equally happy to have traction control. It doesn't really have a whole lot of power, but when you're riding in these conditions, when there's so much mud and muck on the road, it's definitely a good feature to have. Well, you will appreciate it. And from whatever I've seen, the traction control doesn't seem overly intrusive and reactive. It has intervened, but that was when there was definitely a clear loss of grip. So even the electronics front, it seems to be dialed in pretty well. Where else do I think the N160 SS can improve? I think the plastic quality, especially the button feel, how tactile they are, there's definitely scope for improvement there. Also in terms of the TFT dash, I love to see it on a motorcycle, especially in this segment. But I think the font size is a little too small. And also the color scheme which they have used doesn't make it the most legible. It's not the most intuitive. You need to know how to get it. Like, it took me a long time to even just change the riding modes on the go. But if you look at the motorcycle overall, the N160 has always been, like every other Bajaj motorcycle, really high in terms of value for what it brought to the table. What it lacked previously were some things like connectivity, which now they most definitely bridged the gap. I would say, in fact, they have surpassed the competition in terms of the kind of features they have gotten on this motorcycle, in terms of the TFT dash, in terms of the phone mirroring, in terms of the traction control. And now with this new engine, they have also become the leaders in terms of performance. But yes, that performance has come at the cost of some of the refinement, which we were completely blown away with in regards to the N160 2 valve. So that is something that you will have to live with. And also the low end or the mid-range is not as strong as the N160. It takes a while to get into its stride, but once it gets there, it is a very engaging motorcycle. So these are some things that you will need to get used to. They're definitely not a deal breaker by any sorts. Even the vibrations, especially in the fourth and fifth gear, are definitely very manageable. But we are just comparing it to the really high precedent that its previous iteration had set. But another point to remember is, when I'm talking about value for money, yes, the base variant of this, the S variant, will put you back by 1.34 lakhs, which I think is pretty competitively priced for what it offers. The SS variant will put you back by 1.43 lakhs. And what for the SS variant, what you get is the split seat, you get a radial tire at the back, you get adjustable levers, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connectivity, you get traction control, you get the Google Maps mirroring, phone mirroring feature. So if those things are important to you, it's going to cost you a little more money. But as a package now, the N160 definitely makes a lot stronger argument, especially if you're a young fellow and was also looking for a motorcycle which is not only comfortable, but also doesn't leave you wanting in terms of performance.